As fires rage in the West this week, Hurricane Ida devastated the country from Louisiana to as far north as Maine. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer called for Congress to take action on climate change.
Global warming is upon us. When you get 2 record rainfalls in a week, it's not just coincidence. And that's why it's so imperative to pass the 2 bills, the infrastructure bill and the budget reconciliation bill.
Now, you hear Chuck Schumer talking about this idea of this being a sort of national security issue. Courtney, I want to bring you back in. What do you hear from your sources, military sources, about the issue of climate change and the threat that it could have to our national security and to America?
It's a very real concern. And in fact, when Secretary Austin came in as secretary for the first time, we had a defense secretary come in and say that was going to be one of his priorities, was focusing on the impact of climate change. And people may say, oh, come on, that's not a real concern. Well, on a practical level, you have bases that are based right along the coast, and their beaches are eroding. You have rising temperatures that makes it more dangerous for men and women to train in the warm temperatures. So there are very real implications on a day-to-day basis of climate change. And as Chuck Schumer was saying there, the science behind it is the more that the temperature is warming, the more potential there are for these very dangerous and difficult storms that pop up, like what we saw happen in New Jersey and New York. You know, this deluge of water that comes in a very quick manner. So it is a national security concern. The Pentagon actually put out a report about it. And it's something that we're going to see more and more of. It's not just the impact that it would have on the day-to-day basis. It also has the potential to bring troops into other areas. So when you have something like the warmer temperatures, that may cause populations to move. It may cause water to dry up, and people have to move to different areas, and then that causes instability. And then you're talking about the potential for troops to have to be brought in. So it's definitely something that Pentagon leaders are focused on, more so than I have ever seen in my time covering the building.
Susan, there's Courtney saying that they're really focused focused on this in the Pentagon. Is there, though, the political will among Democrats and Republicans to do something together, or Democrats maybe have the votes to do something significant on climate change?
Well, this $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill that we heard Senator Schumer just mention has some really ambitious pieces of climate legislation as part of it that would, I think, go a long way toward an early Democratic agenda of getting it done. But as with every other piece of that bill, you've got to get it through. You've got to get it past a Congress that is almost evenly divided, where there's no room for Democrats to defect on it. And we see every day debates between the most moderate or centrist members of the Democratic Party, like Senator Manchin, and the most liberals, the most progressive members of the House, who have very different visions about what this legislation ought to end up saying and what it should end up costing. And that's something that's going to be worked out in the next few weeks. The crux of the climate change agenda will be determined in the next few weeks in this Congress.
There's one other piece, too, which is this $1 trillion bill, which is the infrastructure. It doesn't combat climate change, per se, but it does make roads and bridges and sewer systems and electrical grids able to withstand some of these other things that we're seeing. And it's something you're going to see the president talk a lot about, and maybe even some Republicans, that look, when these hurricanes come and these wildfires come, here are some things that we can do to help the entire country. So Republicans might not say climate change, but they will be talking about how to shore up the infrastructure.
And Courtney, if I can come back to you, I'm really fascinated by the idea that the Pentagon is talking about this more and more. Can you talk a bit more about what they might have on the agenda, how they might push for things? As, of course, they're not political, but talk a bit about what they might be able to do.
So one of the things, just look at the military's footprint here in the United States, but around the whole world. They are an enormous carbon emitter. So one of the things that they can do is try to reduce their carbon footprint. That's something that this study that the Pentagon put out several months ago, that's one of the things that they recommended. But one other larger thing that the terrible weather, Hurricane Ida, that we've seen happen in these past few days, to me, it also really underscores the role that the military has in responding to these crises. The National Guard is, in particular, there's about 8,000 of them right now that are on duty just responding to Hurricane Ida, handing out water, food, helping with electricity any way that they can. And they have been really taxed in the last year and a half responding to COVID. There were National Guard planes and pilots who were flying Afghans out of Kabul in the last couple of weeks. So that is another potential place where you have an already taxed force, in particular, these local National Guard troops who are there responding at the state level, helping their fellow citizens in their local communities, and they are particularly taxed right now, and it will only get worse.